Yo, what is going on, my fellow weebs? Chrono here, and welcome back to the channel. So we have a new weapon in the mix. Our first 12 star is here, and as promised, I'll be bringing back the series How Strong Is It Actually? But before we jump to that, if you're new here, as always, I'm Chrono. I promote cover PS2 content. Would much appreciate a subscribe as we're right towards that 10K mark, hopefully. I'd say by the end of this year, but that'd be crazy if you guys managed to do it. I'm not going to say you can't, but I'd very much appreciate it. Anyway, let's go ahead and start the video. Now, if this video goes as planned, assuming it goes as planned, either on screen or in the video description, there will be a timestamp to jump directly to overall what the answer is, like the comparison itself. But if you're someone who's curious about the actual journey, what the comparisons are, and the nuance of those damage numbers, we're going to go through them pretty quickly, hopefully in a concise manner that isn't too boring. To start things off, let's hop over to the wiki and we'll talk about essentially what we'll be looking at. So this is the PSO2 wiki. I'm actually going to show you guys two different locations you can look at this information and how to go about getting a hold of it. And we'll be leaving links in the video description to either one of those as well. This is the wiki. This is the Visiphone. The Visiphone is something we've used for a very long time. Wiki is a bit newer, but it is being maintained by people that we actually know. So pretty cool there. Kudos to them for working on something like this. But looking at some of the new stuff at the very least, it looks like it's falling a bit behind. I'm not 100% sure where we're at, but it does have the information we're looking for at the very least. So it's up to you which one of those two you want to go to. If you're looking at something like the wiki, just scroll on down. Click on weapon series, it'll take you to this page here. You can see all the different weapons alongside of the potentials. And you can of course click on the individual weapon, jump over to a page that specializes on that weapon itself. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You can see all the comparisons. It's very, very nice. Now we do have the Visiphone. The Visiphone has something very similar. If you scroll on down, we have weapon series. And then of course it has an entire chart with all the weapons. Now, while this does look a little bit better laid out, in my opinion, technically this layout did happen over on the wiki first. The wiki was the one who came out with this, and then the Visiphone swapped their layout over to this. This wasn't actually the case beforehand. It was separated by weapons and it was a little bit more clunky beforehand. So this is good. I like this. It looks better. I would prefer if the wiki actually had the pictures on here, but it doesn't. It is what it is. No big deal. For sake of the video though, we're gonna be looking at this website here just because it's a little easier for you guys to take a look at. So when you're looking at comparisons, realistically speaking, what weapons should you be looking at? This might hurt a couple people's feelings, which apparently I'm really good at doing. But realistically speaking, you should either be looking at the Epith weapon as the very baseline. Anything below this, please just throw it away. They literally give this to you for free and it's better than whatever else you're using. So this is the baseline. Exilio is your entry. Wingguard is like you had an old weapon that you were still using and you really don't want to get rid of it, or you have made yourself a PB weapon, which we'll talk about that in just a moment. Duo Tricelios, of course, you should be going for a Tricelio off of your Exilio. This is really where most people should be at, in my opinion, if you're playing the game semi-actively. And of course, we have the Twaalv. You can see just from the base damage numbers, Twaalv is our strongest. And then of course, you can also see potency-wise, while it may not have the highest potency for its potential, which is going to affect the overall numbers, by the way, at the end, it is pretty solid at 44%. So we're gonna jump over to Cakewalk's damage calculator next, and we're gonna go ahead and talk about how we're gonna be doing this comparison and how you can go ahead and do the same thing. All right, apologies for the flashbang, but this will also be linked in the video description for you guys. This is Cakewalk's damage calculator. Amazing, amazing individual in the community. Super awesome for them putting this together. It makes our lives a lot easier when doing these comparisons, and it's why these videos can be brought to you. So let's go ahead and talk about the comparison. In case you're curious, you can just head over to the site. I'm gonna leave this link in the description. We'll click on file and then you just click on make a copy, and then you can go ahead and make the changes you need to make for whatever class that you're playing. Of course, putting in your class skills stuff, putting in things like your add-on skills, because it does make a difference. Things like crit rate, all that stuff does matter. So go ahead and put this in if you want to get, your specific setup, exactly how much of a difference it is for you. But I'm gonna be going from a very generalistic standpoint. And with the changes recently to all of the LC augments coming out, doing these comparisons become a lot easier because you guys aren't missing out on a ton of potency floor. And it's actually effective to use things like Grand Dread Keeper 2 LC on your gear because of how much potency floor it actually does give you. So just take what I'm using and swap it for the LC variants. And if there's no LC variant of that specific augment, you can of course use things like, I think was it Might, or basically stat 5s and so on and so forth. So these are all very, very good. And the LC augments are really, really nice as well. So you don't have to worry about doing two different sets, or hey, this isn't going to be exactly the same for you under certain circumstances. It's all basically the same for everyone right now at the moment, at least at the moment. So we are doing the comparison for Bouncer. For Slayers, it's mostly the same. It's just a little bit of extra damage just because Slayer has access to crit rate, and we're going to talk about how that actually plays a part in this overall comparison. But this is basically what we're looking at here. This is just my setup personally that I'm using. You don't have to go to Origis 5, of course. Origis 3 is plenty. And we're using an attack 3 Tricilio, since this is something that most people are going to have. I personally use a Wix 3, or I'm sorry, a Wix 4, going for Wix 5, but this is perfectly fine for what you guys need it for. So this is the actual combination. Let's take a look at the weapon comparison and talk about why they are what they are. All right, so like I said, baseline we're going to be using is going to be a Tricilio at Fix Attack 3. Pretty much everyone has access to getting at the very least this. It's super difficult to go ahead and build up. Attack 1 is basically free. If you're not sure, you can actually go and do a trade-in for an item that will give you a fixa on your weapon. So go and trade in your X cubes, get that, and then roll it over and over again until you get the one that you actually want. And of course, upgrading it past that is mostly free. Just get more fixa 1s and slam them into it so it goes. And then of course, going there from 2 to 3 is also not that difficult. So just keep on going. As you can see, comparatively to the Epith, it's about 11% difference. Now, I know people are like, this isn't that big of a difference. It's not that huge of a deal. I mean, when you look at Epith and the Dism set, it's 26%, which is a lot bigger. This is if you were just using the Epith as is with units that I always had on, which you wouldn't be. You'd be looking more at this number. Honestly, I should probably get rid of this. This is a little bit confusing for some people, I'm sure. But this is really the number of difference that you're looking at. And as you can see, it's pretty massive. And it's only going to get bigger as time goes on. So just keep that in mind. This is the free set that you've been handed. Is 25% behind, over 25% behind right when it releases. So pretty terrible, honestly, in my opinion, especially since the Tricilio is so easy to build and augments are essentially free at this point. It's nothing you have to put that much time or money into. Mostly just a knowledge check. And if you really don't know how, just ask. We got you. So let's go ahead and start with the comparison. Pretty simple. Tricilio, Fix Attack 3. First comparison we're going to compare it to is going to be, let's compare it to a Wingguard. Wingguards are something that people still use because they've had their Wingguards built up from forever. And if we're looking at just a Tricilio, nothing else, just using it as is, it's about 3% over the Wingguard that you have. So that's already going to be a pretty substantial difference in damage when you're looking at it comparatively to the other weapons. So a quick change, I actually opted to go ahead and do the comparison based on Twaalv specifically. That way you guys can kind of see the big difference between them. Now, keep in mind that, yeah, it's going to be kind of major differences in some of these and how far they're behind they are, but I feel like this is going to be easier for you guys to follow, as opposed to me telling you comparatively to something that everyone has currently. The whole point of this is to compare it to Twaalv and how strong Twaalv actually is, so you can kind of see where you are and how far behind you might fall if you're not using a Twaalv. But this isn't going to be for everyone. It's totally understandable. Hopefully this is a bit easier. Let me know how this works out comparatively to what I was doing beforehand, if this is easier to understand. So Twaalv solo is going to be our primary baseline here in this situation. Of course, attack 3. That the same thing applies here. So it's not difficult to get attack on your weapon itself, or get any fixa for that matter on your weapon. Getting it to 3 is not super hard either. But realistically speaking, because you don't have a whole bunch of these, now that I think about it, probably realistically to look at something like attack 1, just because it's essentially free to get 1 fixa on your weapon. And getting more than that could require more 12s, which is extraordinarily expensive. So a lot of people probably aren't going to have that. So we'll go ahead and go with attack 1 just to be somewhat reasonable. Now, if you're a Slayer, Terminal 1. And if you're a Force or a Ranger, I think also possibly a Tector, Wix 1. Just keep that in mind. Everyone else, you're basically going attack, either attack or blaster mostly. Unless you're, again, one of the Abandak gods. And if you're an Abandak god, you don't need me. So why are we even having this conversation? Regardless, let's go ahead and go back to what we're looking at here. So we've got attack 1, and we are comparing against other weapons. Compared against the Epith, it's 27%. That's even bigger. Just again, move on past that. Tricilio again at a rank of Fix Attack 3 is pretty standard for most people. We're comparing it just for Tricilio, and it's only about 1.3% behind, which doesn't sound like much. It's because it actually isn't. And the reason behind that is mostly going to be, 1, the amount of base potency you're getting is only a difference of 40, which is still pretty massive. It's still a good chunk, right? However, the biggest thing that's holding this back is it's 44% potency as opposed to 45. Because of that, you're losing 1% potency in the PB, in the actual, I wasn't saying the PB, but in the potential. And that does matter quite a bit. What you're going to find is potential potency is actually really, really strong with weapons. So because of this, the difference here is not massive. However, it's very rare that you're looking at just the weapon comparisons here. If you're looking at someone's looking at damage, you want to look at a couple of other things included. So let's look at something like just the Wingguard by itself. Well, the Wingguard on its own is behind by 4.4% potency, and it's actually a bit more than that, because most of the time you're not going to be a Wingguard solo buff. most people are going to be Wingard multi-buff. And if you actually compare and add in your regular weapon you were using, your Tricilio, with Wingard, as you can see, it's now stronger than your Twaalv. However, in most situations, if you're using a Twaalv and you're getting Blaster 3 Wingard, you could also just use the Blaster 3 Wingard. So it's a little bit misleading to say this is like 4% because this is just the Twaalv solo, comparatively to using a Tricilio plus a Blaster. In case you're like, what does that mean? Essentially, that means using a Tricilio weapon, and then whenever your PB comes up, hot swapping over to your Blaster 3 Wingard weapon, using the PB on that to get the increased damage bonus, because the PB on Wingard basically puts kind of like a dot on the target and it makes them take 1% more damage from all sources, and that stacks up to 3%. So very, very strong, very useful to have access to, and it's actually very, very important, or I wouldn't say important, but it's really resourceful to have an extra, Blaster Wingard weapon, whether it's one that you kept from beforehand or whether it's one that you made specifically for this reason. It's still really useful to have that weapon to go ahead and get that extra bit of damage slapped on there. And it's only during PBs, right? So you actually have quite a bit of power and you have quite a bit of agency over when exactly you use that weapon. So you've got your Twaalv, you have your Tricilio, one of those two, right? Getting the Wingard damage bonus on top of that is pretty nice. I would like to see what the Twaalv damage would look like with the Wingard damage bonus, since they're not really reliant on one another. And in both cases with these weapons, with the Twaalv weapon and with the Blaster weapon, you can retain their damage bonuses after you swap off of the weapons. So you can, of course, PB on your Wingard and then swap back to your Twaalv or swap back to your Tricilio and retain those damage bonuses because that's on the target. As for the Twaalv, I don't know yet. I got to double check that one. But Twaalv, its potential gives you a damage bonus as well as a crit chance bonus. And that goes to everyone. However, there's a few caveats that we need to kind of talk about here in that specific situation, and one about the Wingard that I didn't mention specifically as well. We'll start with the Wingard one. With Wingard, when you're swapping weapons, one thing to keep in mind when you swap weapons in PSO2 that not everyone might be familiar with is that all sources of damage stop. Meaning that, let's say for example, you're like me and you play Soaring Blades and you put down the damage puddle that does a bunch of hits on the target or whatever after one of our PAs, and then you switch weapons, puddle stops doing damage. Doesn't matter if there's a Soaring Blade on your multi-weapon on the weapon you swap to a Soaring Blade, it just doesn't deal damage. I think that's like coded into the game to deal with like some other issues they might have, but essentially this happens with every single weapon. Whenever you switch weapons, it stops dealing damage. So even worse, if you happen to hot swap over, use a PB that's still out on the field for a while, something like, let's say Jet Boots PB, or what's the other one? Launcher PB. Maybe you happen to use either one of those and then you swap weapons. Well, they stop dealing damage the moment you swap weapons, meaning you're going to lose a massive chunk of damage overall. Now, granted, if you just care about the damage bonus, then yeah, totally understandable. That's fine. Maybe your blaster weapon is just really, really bad. But this isn't exactly an exact number of what you're going to have here, because you can run into that problem. This also may be the case for something like Twaalv. Now, Twaalv is something we have to keep in mind because it procs off of downs. And the thing to remember about downs in this game is they're not all coded the same way. You have physical downs, you have elemental downs, and then you have scripted downs. And for the longest time, Fighter had a lot of issues with downs because their abilities only procced off of like physical down, basically like the regular down that you would get, not the elemental down, and those downs weren't counted for Fighter. And the way they fixed that didn't really fix it, unfortunately. They only made it so it also counts for the other type of down. But every other issue that existed with downs, like that procced off of downs, don't really apply here. So in situations like, let's say for example, Bouncer, whenever I get, we get one of the scripted downs, doesn't really work. I don't get the bonus. Like I usually get PP back whenever there's a scripted down. It doesn't actually work. Now granted, they could have coded Twaalv specifically for this to work, and this could be factored in the situation itself, and I could be a little bit off base here. But if this works like everything else, you can't really take advantage of this consistently unless you're using the weapon primarily. And even then, you're not always going to get the damage bonus. So I'm gonna leave this one with an asterisk. It's possible it could work for more things than we realize, but if it works the same way everything else works in the game currently, this is only gonna work for like a physical down. The way that it's worded, this is only gonna work for a physical down, and that's it, like just a regular down. It doesn't say that it says when you down nearby enemies, right? Which you would think elemental down would count for that as well, but it's a little bit, it's a bit of a pain. The second thing is when you down nearby enemies, not when enemies are downed near you. Meaning that if you didn't hit that target and you weren't a part of that down, you didn't build up anything towards it, it's not going to proc. That's why you have 4-player estimated. 4-player estimated is a little bit also misleading because 4-player estimated assumes that there was a situation where you could have procced down on a target that you specifically didn't proc, but you were close enough to get the bonus damage from, and then you could proc it down on something else that person didn't specifically proc, or maybe that person did proc, but then you proc the down itself, extending the buff. Keep in mind, these buffs don't stack, they extend. So you're not getting 2%, then 4%, then 8%, or you're not getting 2%, then 3.5%, or whatever it happens to be. Like, it's not additive multiplicative, it just resets, meaning that it lasts for longer, which is a good thing. But if we're all stacking the same target, it's going down at the same time, it's still a 20-second buff. So something to keep in mind, at the end of the day, how strong is 12 actually? It's pretty good. It's not terrible. But when you're looking at it comparatively to your other weapon damage choices, it's not that much more powerful. So your Tricilio is still pretty solid. I would stick to that. I would slap LC augments on it all the way across the board on your units and on your weapon. And if you decide you want to get more powerful than that, it's a decision that you can make and you can push yourself even further. But I would say that's the baseline, and anything past that either is a good amount of money to make, or someone who's really, really pushing for the top echelon of the most amount of damage they can deal. And hey, don't hate on that person, because guess what? When they're around and they hit a target and that target's downed, you're getting the damage buff too. Just keep that in mind. Either way, hopefully that helps you guys out. Let me know if there's anything I missed in the comments below. Like if you enjoyed the video. So if you want to keep up with more, as always, thanks to channel members. You guys are fantastic. I appreciate every single one of you, and I will see you all next time. Take care, my friends. Peace out.